This is House Planning Help episode 50. Hi, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in building or renovating. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. Alongside this, I have a personal goal to create an energy efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up in this session, serial self-builder David Snell is my guest. We're looking at how you hire contractors and subcontractors. I'm looking down at this number here. Episode 50. I do feel it's one of those moments that I should just stand back and look at what I've done and contemplate and think, wow, episode 50, we've come a long way. It's been a year and a half, just over that. And I'm so grateful to everyone who's given me the time of day, both the experts and also the homeowners who frequently invite me into their homes so I can have a look firsthand, which is really useful, and hopefully you're seeing the benefit. I sometimes wonder whether I should listen to those early episodes and gauge whether I have progressed a lot, but it must be interesting if you've listened to all of these episodes in quite a short space of time. I hope it's helped. So our interview today is with David Snell. He's a serial self-builder, as I've mentioned, but he's also part of the home building and renovating team. We spoke to Jason Orme in episode 37. I have a feeling that he did mention David in that episode. David is currently building his 14th house, so we're going to find out why he's doing that. We also talk a bit about acquiring land because David thinks that you should never have a problem. It's easy to find land, and he shares his tips for building up a decent team. Oh, I think we also mentioned contracts in this episode. I started by asking David how he got into self-building.
I got into self-building when I self-built the house that my wife and I got married into in 1970. In fact, I carried her across the threshold in 1971 of that first house that we built. I didn't do it entirely on my own. I did it. There were 4 houses, and I built them with some friends, and we put our own labour in, and we employed labour, and it was our first venture for all of us, and we made terrific mistakes, but in the end we got it right, and we managed to build those 4 houses, and we moved into, as I say, one of them.
Can you remember any of those early mistakes?
Oh, the one I can really remember, because it's an awful long time ago now, what I really remember is that when we thought, well, we hadn't got any pea shingle on the site, and we needed to backfill the drains. Oh, we've got plenty of sharp sand and we don't need that. So we use sharp sand instead of pea shingle to haunch around the drains. And of course the building inspector, the minute he saw that, and it took us days to dig it out again. So it's the sort of mistake that you make and don't make again.
Now, a lot of people, when they build a house, they build up all of this knowledge and they never use it again because they've created their perfect house. So how come you ended up building not only a second, but how many more after?
Well, we're now on our 14th self-build project. For me, buying and living in someone else's house is an anachronism. I have to do it occasionally, as we are now. We're living in somebody else's house, renting it off them, and it's not, for me, it's not a pleasant experience. For me, it's a complete anachronism to live in somebody else's house. If we want to move, our first thought is, where's the land and how do we build? And that's what we do. So every time we want to or need to move, the goal has been to buy a piece of land and build our own home.
What are your tips for finding a piece of land then?
Finding a piece of land's never been difficult. For nearly 15 years, I wrote an article for the magazine called Plot Finder Challenge, and once a month I would attach myself to a land list, would be self-building person or couple, and I would find some plots of land in the area they wanted to live at, the price they wanted to live at, to pay, and we would then spend a couple of days looking at those plots of land. They would hopefully buy the piece of land, I would write the story. I did that 12 times a year for 15 years, and 60% of the time they actually bought the plot that we saw on the day. So finding land is not as difficult as you would imagine. It's all over the place. It's just how to look at it and where to look for it. That's the thing.
Is it something that we are doing wrong when we look at it? We're just picking the wrong...
I think, to interrupt you, it's your attitude, I think. Because if you ever meet a self-builder, and I expect you've met quite a few, if a self-builder actually wants to go and self-build at all again, they simply do so. They simply go out there and find the next piece of land without any particular problem. It's the first-time self-builder who has that terrible problem finding the piece of land. So it's a question of attitude. It's a question of being able to, first of all, knowing where to look and who to look for. And that's easy these days because the estate agents do actually sell land to self-builders. When I first started, they didn't want to talk about selling land to self-builders. Now they recognise that perhaps we'll pay a little bit more, and that we probably will do it again, so we are repeat business, just like builders. Also, there are plenty of websites and specific internet sites for the sale of land. There's Plot Finder, there's Plot Search, there's a myriad of them. There's Rightmove, which all deal with land. And there, if you just log on to those things, and you can come away with a whole list of land, and you can refine what you want and where you want. And if you look at it and say, well, I'd always wanted half an acre in the Guildford area and I've only got 150,000, you'd pretty soon find that you couldn't get that. So you'd actually have to refine your search and say, well, we'll move a bit further up the M4 and maybe we'll find 200,000 for the plot, etc.
If you go down that route, does that give you the best price for a plot of land, or is there anything else you can tack on to get some value out of it?
In most cases, there's going to be value in a piece of land. Some vendors don't understand. They think if the finished house is going to be worth 300,000 and it's going to cost 150 to build it, their land is worth 150,000. That actually leaves no profit for the builder or developer or self-builder. And their land hangs around on the market for a long time as a result, because there has to be an engine to create development. The engine in any business, this is no different in building and in self-building, the engine is profit. And that engine has to be there. And so that land always has a value relevant to the house that can be built upon it, but that also must include a profit. There is, in fact, a simple means of valuing land, which anybody can sort of learn to do. And it's simply that the land cost plus the build costs plus a margin of, say, 20 to 30% equals the end value of the house. And you need to learn to use that equation and to look at a piece of land and work that equation out in your head. You need to be able to juggle the first three elements of that equation to always add up to the last element, so that the land cost plus the build cost plus the margin must never exceed the end value. Could be less than the end value, in which case your quid's in, but it mustn't ever exceed it, and you need to be able to juggle those. So if the land's costing more than you'd originally hoped for, then something else has got to give. Either the cost of the building's got to go down or the amount of the margin's got to go down. But they must never exceed the end value of the house.
I had to ask you some questions on that. One of the key things that I want to do today is to ask a little bit about the people that work with you on a site and setting that up. Are you hands-on? Do you get involved yourself?
I'm nearly 70. I'm not hands-on with anything.
So you are the brains behind this.
I used to be hands-on. I'm not no longer.
Well, fair enough. I understand that. So how do you set this up? What are the first things once you've got your plots? Who do you look to first?
I think if you've lived in an area for a long, long while, you would build up a knowledge of local tradesmen. You'd have people that you know, friends you know, or family you know, who've had something built in the area. You may have had an extension to your house or built an extension to your house, which has introduced you to the technology of building houses, the terminology of building houses, and also the people who are involved. And so that if you lived in an area for a long, long while, you've probably built up a knowledge of who to talk to in the first place anyway. If not, then I think I would always go by recommendation. And if you've decided to build a house, then start to ask people who are having a house built or have had an extension done, who did this for you? Were they any good? And they will tell you, oh, this bloke was fabulous, or this bloke turned up and he was there on the Monday, we never saw him for weeks afterwards. That's the sort of person you don't deal with. This person was good on this, but he wasn't particularly good on that. I'd have him again to do my roof, but I wouldn't let him hang my doors. Learn that sort of thing from their previous clients. If you don't reach labour or builders by recommendation, there are plenty of places to look for builders. Again, the internet can come to your help here. You know, searching for builders on the internet, there's plenty of internet sites that deal with that. Even if you find them like that, still don't forget that that idea of recommendation. Many of the internet sites have their recommendations. They've got star ratings and things like that. But you still, I think, need a personal recommendation. And I would always ask any person who was going to work for me on a site to give me the names and addresses of other people they'd done the job for. And I would go and see them and have the courage to knock on the door and say, I understand Jim Bloggs did this or that for you. What was he like? And get it from the horse's mouth. It's no good finding out at the fag end of a job when there's no money left on it that the bloke's not reliable. You need to know that right from the beginning. And you don't deal with that person. And the only way to do that is to talk to their previous clients.
Have you ever had a situation where you had to part company with?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. A bad bricklayer or a bad carpenter is used to being sent down the road, quite frankly. But did you do the homework on him to employ him in the first place? Did you talk to his previous clients and, most importantly, look at his previous jobs? And if you hadn't done that, then you suddenly discover he's a bad bricklayer, then the fault is yours, not his, because he just happens to be a bad bricklayer.
So what was the situation that you were thinking of? Because you said yes to this question.
I mean, there are countless. I mean, I've watched a plasterer and realised that he couldn't do it and said, out, sunshine.
How do you know he can't do it? Or is this just, I suppose you've seen it many times?
I don't think you have to be an expert to rub the back of your hand. And it should be the back of your hand, by not the front of your hand, because if you use the front of your hand, it puts grease on the plaster and it's difficult to paint afterwards. If you rub the back of your hand down the plaster, I don't think you have to be an expert to feel that that's rough. I don't think you have to be an expert to look at bricks to see that they're all higgledy-piggledy, that the horizontal joints are up and down, or the burps don't line up, the vertical joints don't line up, and or that they're smudged in mortar. I don't think you have to be an expert for that. I think any layperson can see that. I think any layperson can see whether the doors hang properly and stay where they're put, and rather than swinging shut or swinging open. These are the sort of things we live within. It's the cocoon we live within, which we call home, and it's not difficult to see whether it's good or bad.
Going back to the beginning for a moment, when I asked you about the first people that you get on board, who is that for you? This
14th project of ours, we are now I'm talking to you in Kent. We, until a month ago, lived in Gloucestershire. That's where I've built the last 4 houses. Even those 4 houses in Gloucestershire were an amalgam of people I built up, and people who were discarded and new people who were taken on. Here, we're completely fresh territory. We came here not knowing a soul. How did I find who I'm dealing with? I looked through on the internet. I rang people. I went to see them. I went to see their work, and I got to know them. And I looked for the key trade to start with, which in my case was bricklayer. Having found the good one that I think I'm happy to play with, it's not that difficult to roll on from that and find the other trades. A good carpenter doesn't want to follow a bad bricklayer because he's just got terrible problems with the levels for his plates or his joists or whatever. A good bricklayer doesn't want to follow a bad ground worker because he's got to spend days on end trying to level up his foundations and things like that. So they tend to work in laissez-faire groupings. And if you get to a good tradesman, then they will always recommend the tradesman either side of them or the tradesman that they've worked with in the past. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Never, by the way, never ask for them to recommend a tradesman in their own trade, in their own discipline, because they'll never have a good word to say about anyone in their own discipline. It's disciplines either side of them that you need to ask about.
Do you bargain on price a lot, or how do you get together what they are going to be costing?
You know, I've been in the industry now 52 years and I've built up a fair bit of knowledge about things. So in a way, pricing is something that I understand and know in an encyclopedic sort of way. But at the same time, I always, whenever I've got my plans drawn, I send them off to an estimating company, and it's 150 quid plus VAT, and they send them back, and I've got an estimate of everything. Happily, it normally accords with what I expect it to do. That's then my guide through the project. For example, the estimate I've got for the current house says that the electrician should be 5,200. I've actually got a quote for 5,900, but that includes a garage and a shed, etc., etc. So I know I'm on the right lines with that one. But I already knew before he gave me the price what his price should be, or the ballpark figure.
And is there ever a case for, let's say, he'd charge £7,000 that would actually be justified because he's superior in some way, or do you think there are more or less these markers?
No, I don't think so. I think a good bricklayer is as good as another good bricklayer. What I wouldn't do, to go back to your question as well, is I wouldn't argue about prices and try and beat people down. I think a couple of years ago you could probably have done that in the depths of the housing depression. In normal business, it's not a good thing to do. I think if a man gave you a price of £6,500 and you said, "Oh, you can have the job for £6," he would always perceive that you'd robbed him of £500, and he will get it back. He will get it back by skimping on the job or charging you extras. So you won't have won anyway.
By that token, then, there is very little bargaining power.
There's not bargaining. This isn't an Arab souk. This is getting you a house built, and this is getting you a house built by proper people at proper prices. If somebody gives you a price which, on your estimating thing, should have been £5,500 and it comes in at £8,500, either they think you're a soft touch or they don't want the job. In which case, you don't deal with them.
That makes total sense. Can I ask a bit about contracts? What would I need to know about contracts? This is the first time that I know about this.
You're talking about written contracts.
Contracts that you will need when you have your subcontractors, etc.
I would guess that 90% of self-build projects don't have a written contract, don't have a formal contract in place. That doesn't mean to say it's not a good idea. The fact of the matter is that if you wave a sheaf of paper an inch thick at a builder and ask him to sign on the bottom, he'll probably add the date into the price. I have nothing against a very short, simple form of 5 or 10 page contract in plain English with tick boxes, say, about whether they can use the toilet if they're building extension, when they'll start, when they'll finish, importantly, when you'll pay them, and at what stages of the build you will pay them and how much you'll pay them. And also, if the contract has something in it which will deal with what happens if matters do go wrong. How do you terminate a contract? How do you get them off your site? How do you agree a termination? Most decent contracts, that is the most important bit of it. And everything goes swimmingly, the contract's just something that can go in the bin. But if it goes pear-shaped, then that contract will detail how you get out of that, or how indeed the builder gets out of that problem, and how you solve the problem.
Is it more of an agreement of what you're going to do, really, rather than a contract? Because you were saying about those elements. So what elements do you need to set up front when you're talking about your work?
The price has to be agreed, and the way in which you'll pay it, and the rate at which you'll pay. If you're dealing with first of all, no subcontractor, no labour-only subcontractor, or even a plumber or electrician who's supply and fix is really going to be interested in signing any kind of contract. With them, it's just going to be a question of offer and acceptance. You are going to ask them for a quotation. They are going to give you a quotation. You are going to accept it, and the contract is formed by offer and acceptance. With a small builder, yes, there can be this simple form of contract that I've talked about. The main business is it's sorting out how you will pay them. But you still need to work that out with subcontractors, because if you've got a builder who's building a house for you and he's undertaking the whole shooting match, then you'll obviously agree to pay him as certain stages of the build are reached, and you will pay him either an agreed sum or an agreed proportion of the sum as each stage will be reached. And that's simple and that's straightforward and that's sensible to have that down. And you don't pay him until and unless that stage is reached. If he starts asking you for money before that stage is reached, alarm bells should start to go off. Hang on, this guy's in problems of some sort. How do we sort this problem out? So that's with a builder. With a subcontractor, there won't be a formal contract, as I say, other than this offer and acceptance. But there still has to be some agreement as to how you're going to pay this bricklayer. If you've agreed to pay a bricklayer £12,000 to do the brickwork on your house, at what rate is he going to be paid? If he thinks he's going to be there for 12 weeks and you pay him, $1,500 a week, then you're going to 10 weeks into the job. You're not going to have anything left on it. And he might perceive that, hang on, I can go down the road and get more money, and might not finish. And if you think that doesn't happen, as you drive around, look at the gable ends of houses and look for the number of gable ends where it's quite obvious that a different bricklayer has laid those bricks. It does happen.
let's say you do have that situation where you've got to bring on someone else. Are there any things that we need to consider in that case, or is it going to be much tougher to get this team member in?
It's tougher to get somebody to take on somebody else's work. If you're using an NHBC builder, the NHBC will help you find a new builder to take on the job. But quite frankly, if you've got 75% of the way through a job with a builder and he goes pear-shaped on you and you need another builder, it will probably cost you 50% of the job to finish it. Now, normally you'll be okay, because if you're using an NHBC registered builder, that will be covered by their insurance. But you'll also be covered because happily in the building industry, we pay people in arrears. So that you shouldn't have paid the builder for the stage that he hasn't reached, in effect, when you parted company with him. So you should always be in hand.
I was just going to say to you, was that actually, that would be back to our fault again, for me? So, yeah.
A number of people do pay too much up front. I know people who've paid builders up front, and builder has said, I need a couple of grand to sort of get everything all organised and get. This is rubbish. If anyone asks you for money up front, then you walk away, quite frankly. There's no need for a builder or a subcontractor to ask you for money up front. If they've got any kind of credit rating at all, they will pay their builders merchants at the end of the month following the month of invoice. That's 8 weeks. At the longest period. It's between 4 and 8 weeks. So they haven't got to pay anything out for materials for 4 to 8 weeks. They haven't got to pay anything to labour except in arrears themselves. So there's no reason to pay anyone up front. Where the lay self-builder can get into problems is paying too heavily throughout the job, so that the job physically can't be finished before there's not a lot of money left on the job. So you have to be very, very careful. And if someone says they're going to be there 10 weeks. You don't pay them 1,000 every week. You pay them 800 every week to keep that incentive to finish.
How many people do you have in total working on this project that you're undergoing at the moment?
Well, there's never more than about 5 or 6 guys on site at any time.
When it comes to teamwork and people working together, if there's only 5, then I imagine, do they come as a team?
They either come as a team if you're using a builder. If there's a builder, there could be 14 people on there. But if you're using subcontractors, they probably will come in, and do their jobs once the other guys have gone. And
there's no stepping on feet or anything like that. They can work.
No, around. I mean, half the business of programming a site is understanding the sequence of events through a site. I think it's important you learn what happens when. Once you've got the weather-tight shell finished, for example, the plumber and the electrician and the plasterers are the next ones in. But the plumber can be there at the same time as the electrician, or the electrician to be coming next week. And once the plasterer comes in, everybody's got to clear out. So it's a sequence of events, and you need to understand that sequence of events, and then I don't think people tread on people's toes too much. If you've got to the situation where you've got carpenters trying to sort of cut skirting boards and so putting dust and sawdust everywhere, and you've got a painter at the other end of the room trying to paint them, then something has gone terribly wrong because he's wasting his time. You need to get him out and say, come back later, sunshine, when we've cleared up this place.
As we just wind up this little section on putting together a team, are there any other key points that will help us make a success of this?
I think I would stick to the key point, go by recommendation, look at their previous work, talk to their previous clients, and find them through each other.
That's quite succinct. I now want to talk, just as we get towards the end, about some of your self-build history and going through all of these projects. Do you feel that each time you go through it, you improve, you hone, you've got something more to go on to the next project, or is it just like repeating the same thing again and again?
No, I've never built the same house twice. The last 5 houses will have been bungalows. This is the last one, by the way. But I've built to accommodate our lives and our lifestyles, and to survive children and them survive me, quite frankly, because I think the generations don't always mix happily in houses. I think most of what goes for, inverted commas, family housing, close inverted commas, is not fit for purpose. I don't think the generations can suitably live with each other in most houses, which is why most kids get thrown out on the street and get into trouble because they're interfering with dad listening to the television. just one example, when my children were teenagers, I specifically built so that they had their own lounge. Their bedrooms were separate from ours, still within the property, and that they could live a semi-separate existence where they could maybe sit quietly and do their homework while father played loud rock music and didn't disturb them, or maybe the other way round at times, but where we could survive each other and still live as a family unit. And the telling thing was that my kids never hung around at the bus stop, but all their friends used to come to our house. So we became de facto the sort of local youth centre for my children's group of friends.
Well, it's been fantastic to chat to you today, David. I wonder whether you have one final parting piece of advice.
Just do it, because I don't know anything that changes people's lives to such an extent as self-building. It really is a game changer. It changes your life financially, because most people make huge amounts of money in relative terms, a huge amount increases in equity, and it also changes people's lives because of the empowerment it gives them. Before you self-build, you're just somebody who goes to work and gets paid by someone else. When you start self-building, you're the boss suddenly, and you're paying out massive amounts of money to people who are relying on you. And I think that changes your life completely.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quite an interesting way to finish the interview. Do you feel empowered if you build your own home? Ponder on that. houseplanninghelp.com/50. We summarise all the key points from the interview in our show notes. There's a link to David's book called Building Your Own Home. And also, if you have a comment or a question, you can leave it at the bottom there. If it's a question, we'll try and get it answered for you as well. I have a question for you too, but this is really to draw on your experience. Perhaps you've been through this process already. How did you find your contractor or your subcontractors? Have you anything else that you could add to this conversation? I'd love to hear what you have to say. A quick Kickstarter update. I've mentioned this over the previous couple of episodes that we're looking to create a documentary called The Future of Housing. And this is all on airtightness. Ideally, in an ideal world, I'm not sure whether I've said this, I would love it to be episode 1 and we go on to do other things. But we'll see how it goes. It's a crowd-funded campaign, so we have to hit our target. And I'm going to give you the full details in our next episode. But I've spent the last week or so trying to get people on board. It feels a bit like a political campaign, but don't worry, it isn't. There's nothing political here. We just want some better houses being built. So I'm going to give you a bonus episode as our next episode, and that will be on launch day, just me on my own, going through why I would like to make this documentary, why I feel that time is right, and how you can help, all the facts, and plus who the team is, of course. My call to action today is to write us a review on Stitcher. Now, Stitcher is not quite as popular as iTunes, but it certainly is growing in significance. And again, it's all about if you get reviews, then they seem to bump up your visibility in that particular platform. So this is Stitcher, and that's where it would help. So I guess this is relevant to you. If you're listening on Stitcher, please take the time to write a short review. So next time, as I mentioned, it's a short episode. I'll give you the full details about the House Planning Help Kickstarter campaign. I hope you can make it for that one. Cheers.